Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever had to stand up in front of a crowd, you definitely know that universal, completely paralyzing fear of public speaking. You know the drill: sweaty palms, your heart is racing, and you have this desperate, overwhelming urge to literally be anywhere else. Well, today we're going to explore exactly why our brains betray us in these moments, and we'll be using the fascinating world of psychology to decode that dread. It really is a fascinating question, isn't it? Why do we fear public speaking when we aren't in any actual physical danger? I mean, it's not like the audience is going to suddenly jump up and attack us. Yet, for some reason, this fear consistently ranks at the very top of our collective lists, sitting right up there alongside the fear of death, heights, and snakes. You know, the comedian Jerry Seinfeld once brilliantly highlighted the sheer absurdity of this fear in his stand-up. He pointed out that to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. It's hilarious, but it hits the nail on the head when it comes to how intense and irrational this panic can be. So, to really understand the multitude of reasons behind this, we have to look through a few different lenses. Okay, let's quickly run through our agenda for this explainer. We'll be covering the mystery of behavior, the inner mind, environment and society, biology and evolution, the power of choice, and finally, the integrative approach. Starting right off with Section 1, the mystery of behavior, exploring the why behind our actions. To really understand our actions, psychology gives us these distinct frameworks called perspectives. Basically, you can think of a perspective as a specific approach or a lens that psychologists use to explain why people think, act, and feel the way they do. And these lenses help us decode absolutely everything, from everyday emotions like sadness or sudden road rage, all the way to extreme phobias, like freezing up the second you grab a microphone. Moving on to Section 2, the inner mind, where we'll compare the psychodynamic and cognitive views. When we start exploring how our minds actually dictate our fears, it's wild to see how directly these two perspectives clash. On one side, we've got the psychodynamic perspective. It's one of the oldest in psychology, pioneered by Sigmund Freud. It basically argues that we're driven by the ancient depths of our unconscious mind, kind of like an iceberg where the vast majority of our motives are completely hidden underwater. But on the other side, the cognitive perspective acts as a modern counterargument, focusing entirely on active, conscious thought and how we interpret the present moment. So, if we look closely at the psychodynamic approach, the focus is entirely on the unconscious mind, unresolved conflicts, and repression. From this viewpoint, a massive overreaction, like sudden road rage, or in our case, a paralyzing fear of public speaking, might actually stem from something you can't even actively remember. It could literally be a repressed childhood memory of being belittled or rejected by an overbearing teacher. You push that trauma deep down into the abyss, but it bubbles back up as sheer terror the second you have to face an audience. Contrast that with the cognitive approach. This one is all about active thinking, memory, and information processing. A cognitive theorist would argue that you aren't being controlled by some hidden childhood trauma at all. Instead, you're driven by your own conscious, irrational thoughts right in the moment. It's that inner critic screaming, "What if they see me sweating?" Or, "Oh no, what if my zipper is down?" Think of those prank shows where an elevator floor is painted to look like it's falling away. The people inside jump back in absolute terror, not because they're in actual danger, but because their conscious mind interprets that visual information as a threat. It's their thoughts driving the panic. Let's shift gears to Section 3, environment and society. Here, we'll look at the behavioral and sociocultural views. Now we're going to shift our focus completely outward to see how our environment and our society mold our reactions. The crucial question here is about the external forces at play. Are we simply conditioned by punishments like the behavioral perspective suggests? Or are we heavily influenced by broader, unspoken societal rules, which is what this sociocultural perspective focuses on? Either way, both agree that the world around us is what shapes our fear. The behavioral perspective leans heavily on conditioning, and that's really just a fancy word for learning through rewards and punishments. Think about this really simple sequence. You touch a hot stove, you experience a painful burn, and you very quickly learn to never ever touch it again. We are passive learners shaped by our environment. So, a behaviorist would argue that your fear of public speaking could just be a learned association. Maybe you misspoke in a middle school play once, the audience chuckled, and that embarrassment acted as a punishment. Now, you avoid the stage at all costs. Taking a much broader view, we have the sociocultural perspective, focusing on norms, folkways, and social interaction. This lens suggests our behavior is totally dictated by implicit societal rules. For instance, different cultures have entirely different rules for things like making eye contact or expressing emotion. Plus, people from highly individualistic cultures, like in North America or Europe, often feel this immense societal pressure to succeed strictly on their own merits. So, standing entirely alone on a stage amplifies that cultural pressure, turning normal, everyday nervousness into full-blown stage fright. All right, on to Section 4, Biology and Evolution, digging into our physical and ancestral roots. Next up, we're examining the biological and evolutionary lenses to see exactly how our own physical body betrays us. The biological perspective, which is sometimes called the neuroscience perspective, argues that everything psychological is simultaneously biological. It's all driven by brain structures, neurons, and genetics. When you grab a microphone, this tiny almond-shaped structure deep in your brain called the amygdala detects a threat, and it instantly sounds the alarm, flooding your body with physiological changes and pumping out hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine. So, that racing heart of yours, it isn't just a feeling, it is a very real, hardwired biological reaction. Let's look at the evolutionary view and see how this builds on biology. Grounded in Charles Darwin's theories, this perspective asks why that biological alarm even exists in the first place. Well, when your brain perceives a large audience staring silently at you, it hilariously and kind of tragically misinterprets this as a literal life or death threat. To your ancient brain, hundreds of eyes locked on you means you're being hunted by a pack of predators, like a saber-toothed tiger. Your body's instantly thrown into an ancient fight-or-flight survival mode, which, was great for keeping our ancestors alive on the plains, but it's absolutely terrible for giving a Tuesday morning PowerPoint presentation. Moving to Section 5, the power of choice, which is the humanistic viewpoint. Let's explore what psychologists call the third wave to see how this pushes back against the idea that we're all just biological robots. The humanistic perspective differs wildly from everything we've talked about so far. It introduces this great concept called self-actualization. Championed by psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers in the 1960s, this is the belief that human nature is inherently positive. We aren't simply controlled by our environment or our genes, we have free will, and we are constantly striving to be the best possible versions of ourselves. This approach places a huge emphasis on self-actualization, free will, and positive growth. From this deeply optimistic viewpoint, fear isn't just an evolutionary glitch or some traumatic scar from your past. Instead, a humanist would argue that fear is a powerful motivator. We actually choose to step onto that stage, purposely seeking out difficult tasks so we can triumph over adversity. Experiencing that fear and then conquering it, that's an active choice we make to achieve personal growth and live our best lives. And finally, Section 6, the integrative approach, unifying the perspectives. So, out of all these, which of the 7 perspectives is actually right? Well, the truth is, there is no single right perspective. Human behavior is just incredibly complex. You really can't explain the entirety of human thought with just biology, or just childhood memories, or just environmental conditioning. And that is exactly why the modern view adopted by most psychologists today is an eclectic, unified view. They see all these different approaches as deeply connected and interrelated. Which brings us perfectly to the biopsychosocial model. This is the integrative approach that really unifies modern psychology. Instead of forcing us to choose just one single lens, this model combines biological factors, psychological factors, and social factors into one massive, comprehensive framework to fully explain why we do what we do. The biopsychosocial model brilliantly illustrates how all these pieces come together to create the complete picture of our fear. So, why do we fear public speaking? Well, biologically, our amygdala is firing off a fight or flight response. Psychologically, we might be battling irrational conscious thoughts of failure or even suppressed childhood rejection. And socially, we're facing intense cultural pressures to succeed right alongside the learned conditioning of past embarrassments. The biological, psychological, and social lenses merge perfectly to give us the full explanation for our terror. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought experiment. Take a look at your own life. When you get nervous, when you feel super motivated, or when you react strongly to a situation, which psychological perspective do you think drives your daily habits the most? Is it your biology, your environment, your conscious thoughts, or your drive for positive growth? Keep these 7 lenses in mind as you go about your week, and I guarantee you'll start seeing the fascinating machine